Yes, Lordship,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Potter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Potter. Then that is the evidence that I call. Right.
Then do you address the jury
Lord, yes.
for the prosecution, Mr. Russell?
It will only take a very few minutes, members of the jury. But the fact is, and you may think, and I suggest that you should, that this is being conclusively proved, is that these young boys were killed and buried secretly in the Tower, where they had been incarcerated by their uncle, this defendant, when he seized the throne. And members of the jury, this just could not have happened without Richard knowing about it and condoning it. Everything Richard did points to his guilt, and nothing specifically, other than assumption, points to his innocence. Members of the jury, that is, in a sentence, why we suggest that he is probably guilty of this murder. And I use that word probably advisedly, because as his lordship told you at the commencement of this trial, that is the onus which is upon the prosecution to prove, to satisfy you in the special circumstances in this case of the guilt of this defendant. Of course, the evidence is circumstantial and largely hearsay. It has to be. Well, where do we start? We start with the bones. That the anatomists and the historical facts, particularly that the princes, those two boys, were in the Tower at that time, and people had said they were killed, and people had said that they were buried in the place where those bones were found, makes the coincidence too great, you may think, certainly on the balance of probabilities, too great not to be those of the princes, despite what Mr. Potter may still try to persuade you to the contrary. Who had the motive? Well, answer primarily, if not solely, Richard. And the events underline that motive. The power of the Woodvilles, the fear of the Woodvilles, the takeover bid by the Woodvilles, which brings Richard hurrying south at Hastings' requirement. And what does he do? He sets about destroying that powerful faction, the Woodvilles. The two heirs to the throne are held in the Tower. There's no question, is there, but that Richard, the younger of the two, was removed from sanctuary by deceit and by deception on the pretext, this being the 16th of June, on the pretext that he was required to attend his brother's coronation. It is very clear that by this stage, members of the jury, you may think that Richard already was setting out to obtain the crown for himself, because within 5 days, the question of the bastardization is being shouted from the pulpit of St. Paul's. Who stood in his way? Hastings. Because Hastings said no when Buckingham attempted to find out whether Hastings would agree. And what happened to Hastings? Well, I needn't repeat it. You have heard. Asked to come to a council which was split, a half meeting in the Tower, he's arrested and executed immediately without trial. Well, members of the jury, what was he going to do about the boys? Well, at the first stage was to declare them illegitimate. And that he did, in a way which you have heard from the witnesses, and I need not repeat. The witnesses for the prosecution have said clearly a pretext. And the fact that they'd been bastardized really didn't matter, because if that happened, the next claimant to the throne, or the protector on behalf of Edward V, if he was ever put back there, would have got his parliament to reverse the bastardization in exactly the same way as Henry VII did when he finally defeated Richard after the Battle of Bosworth. And therefore they still were a danger, and you may think, therefore, had to be destroyed. And destroyed they were. Rumour and record at the time, and afterwards, condemn Richard. Mancini, from the small excerpts to which you have had referred, obviously thought that he'd done it, but effectively says, reading between the lines, well, it doesn't surprise me because of the ruthless disposal of Hastings. Croyland, no positive evidence, the careful insider historian, but finds it difficult to remain silent altogether and introduces it at least in those verses. Philip Comines, the Frenchman, says it categorically. And the other Frenchman, the French Chancellor, makes that public and damning statement. But from Richard, answer comes there not. Silence, a silence resonant in its significance. Well, members of the jury, do we really need the Tudor historians, I won't call them chroniclers, the Tudor historians at all, More and Virgil? It's for you to say how much reliance can be placed upon More. Is it the work of an intellectual joker to which no regard should be paid at all? Excuse me. Or is it, as Mr. Starkey said, for the reasons which he gave, a record to accept in outline, if not in detail? Is no relevance at all to be placed upon Polydore Virgil, who gives the More version but in less detail, simply because he was commissioned by a Tudor king to write a history of England? And there are the other later records about which you heard. Well, members of the jury, you're not being asked to say that you are satisfied, say that you are certain that he did. You're only being asked to say that he probably did it. And in the end, as I've said, it comes to this. The princes disappeared. There were rumours that they were killed, which turned out to be true, you may think, beyond any doubt at all. Richard must have known that they were killed. And either he had ordered it, or he would have been told about it. Brackenbury, the keeper of the tower, put there by Richard, a friend of Richard's. There is no way that anybody, Buckingham or anybody else, could have entered that tower and killed those boys without Brackenbury, the keeper, knowing. And Richard would have been the first person to know after that. But what did he do? Absolutely nothing. And that can only mean, we would suggest, as you've heard from Mr. Pollard and from Mr. Richards, that can only mean that he ordered those executions, because otherwise he must have accused the wrongdoer to clear himself. And it's no good saying, we suggest, that, well, it could have been somebody else like Buckingham, and Richard couldn't do anything about it for fear he wouldn't be believed. He would have been no worse off, and certainly probably very much better off, to have taken the action of accusation and denial. Now, Mr. Jerry, there it is. There's really only one question that you've got to ask yourself. Has it been shown to our satisfaction that King Richard probably ordered the deaths of the princes? If the answer is yes, then he is guilty, and we would respectfully submit that that verdict is well-founded upon the evidence which you have heard.